Sicilian Regional Law Number 07 of 2016, along with the subsequent 2018 implementation decree, represents the exact moment Italy finally began to dismantle the dangerous anarchy that had defined industrial diving for decades. For years, the sector operated in a regulatory void, where safety was often treated as an optional expense rather than a human right. According to data from industry safety reports, this transition was born out of necessity following a long, grim list of workplace fatalities that occurred not in far-flung oceans, but in everyday environments like rivers and dams. We aren't talking about rare accidents. We're talking about a systemic failure to protect workers who were diving without the shield of clear, enforceable standards.
The scale of that anarchy is hard to overstate. Before the Sicilian law, the only real legal framework in Italy was a ministerial decree from 1979. It introduced the Technical Underwater Operator, or OTS, but there was a massive catch. It was written almost exclusively for work inside ports. Once you stepped outside those harbour walls, whether you were working on a dam in the mountains, a river, or an offshore oil platform, you were essentially in a legal Wild West. In those zones, there were no national rules dictating what equipment you needed or how many people had to be in a team. This created a race to the bottom, where pirate companies could win contracts by cutting safety corners that reputable firms wouldn't touch. They could send a diver down alone with just a tank on their back, which is exactly what leads to the accounting of blood mentioned in the industry records.
That phrase, accounting of blood, is haunting, but the records back it up with devastating specifics. Take the case of Luigi Longo. He was only 34 when he died while performing maintenance on the Tumblone system in San Giorgio di Nogaro. He was at a depth of only 14 meters, a depth many recreational divers handle on holiday. Yet in an industrial context, without proper oversight, it proved fatal. Then there's the tragedy at the Castel Giubileo ENL lock on the Tiber in January 2003. A firefighter diver lost his life during an intervention triggered by a private company. Reports from that incident suggest the equipment and methods were completely unsuitable for murky waters and strong currents. It illustrates a terrifying reality. Even those trained for rescue were at risk because the baseline environment was so poorly regulated.
It proves that murky water and high currents don't care how brave you are if the procedures are broken. Sicily, being a region with such a deep historical and economic tie to maritime work, finally said enough. When they passed Law 07/2016, they didn't just add a few rules, they created a whole new architecture for the industry. The most revolutionary part was the telematic register of industrial diving operators. Suddenly, you couldn't just claim to be a commercial diver because you had a scuba certificate and a toolkit. You had to be on that register, and your presence there depended on very specific, scientifically structured qualifications. They broke the work down into 3 distinct tiers: inshore, offshore air, and high depth or saturation. This ended the era of the generic diver who could be sent into any situation regardless of the specific hazards.
The tier system seems like common sense, but the technical requirements attached to them are where the real safety gains happened. For the inshore level, which covers inland and coastal waters up to 30 meters, the law mandates specific surface-supplied equipment. But look at the offshore air or top-up level, covering 30 to 50 meters. The law makes it obligatory to use a basket or a bell. You can't just swim down. This mirrors the international standards set by bodies like IDSA, the International Diving Schools Association. By explicitly citing IDSA protocols in the legislative text, Sicily aligned itself with global best practices. This isn't just about Italy anymore, it's about a diver's certification in Palermo having the same technical weight as one in the North Sea or the Gulf of Mexico.
That alignment with IDSA and by extension the recommendations of IMCA, the International Marine Contractors Association, is the crux of the whole thing. IMCA is basically the world authority for offshore contracts. They recommend IDSA Level 3 training for anyone working in that top-up zone. By baking these into law, Sicily ensured that their divers weren't just safer, they were internationally employable. In practical terms, this means the lone diver model is dead. The law mandates a full surface team, a shift supervisor to run the show, a safety diver ready to jump in instantly if things go wrong, and the use of an umbilical. That umbilical is a lifeline. It provides air, depth monitoring, and constant voice communication with the surface control center. The diver is never truly alone anymore.
It's a shift from surviving the dive to managing the risk. But I wonder about the companies that were used to the old ways, transitioning from a pirate model where you save money by skipping the umbilical and the supervisor to a model where you need a full certified team and expensive ventilated helmets. That's a huge financial jump. Does the law actually have the teeth to stop companies from just ignoring it? Or are we still seeing a divide between the serious players and the ones who are still cutting corners under the radar?
The divide is certainly there, but the law changes the liability landscape completely. When a standard like the Sicilian one is codified, a company that ignores it isn't just being efficient, they're being criminally negligent. The telematic register acts as a gatekeeper. If a contractor wants to hire a diving company for a project on a dam or a platform, they check the register. If the company isn't there, or their divers don't have the specific top-up or saturation ratings required for the depth, the contractor takes on massive legal risk. It creates a market incentive for safety. The serious companies invest in the gear and the training because it's now the only way to legally bid for high-value work. The pirates are being pushed into smaller and smaller corners of the market until they either adapt or disappear.
It's fascinating that a regional law in Sicily managed to set the template for the whole of Italy. It's often described as a civilizing force for the industry. It moved the conversation away from just not dying to professional excellence. However, a law is just ink on paper if the training isn't there to support it. You can mandate a ventilated helmet and an umbilical, but if the diver hasn't been trained to use them in a high-stress, zero-visibility environment, the equipment won't save them. This brings us to the strategic role of institutions like CEDIFOP in Palermo. They've become the front line for implementing this Sicilian model.
Absolutely. CEDIFOP, led by Manos Kouvakis, has been instrumental in pushing for these standards long before they were even law. They focus on the IDSA training paths, which are rigorous. We're talking hundreds of hours of training, not a weekend course. For example, to get that offshore air qualification, a diver needs to prove competence not just in swimming, but in underwater welding, hydraulic tool use, and hyperbaric medicine. They have to understand the physics of what's happening to their body at 50 meters. That level of knowledge is what turns a worker who dives into a professional industrial diver. The Sicilian law effectively made this kind of excellence the baseline.
It also highlights the importance of the diver medic qualification. In the deep offshore or saturation levels, you can't just call an ambulance if someone has a seizure or a decompression hit. The team on the surface and in the bell needs to be able to provide advanced life support while the diver is still under pressure. The Sicilian law requires this. It recognizes that the environment itself is the primary hazard, and you need a mini hospital's worth of knowledge on site. It's a holistic approach to safety that covers the equipment, the team structure, and the medical readiness all at once.
And it's important to remember that this isn't just about the big jobs like oil platforms. The law covers inland waters too.
Think about the maintenance of a hydroelectric dam. You're often working in freezing water, at high altitude, inside dark tunnels where the risk of entanglement is huge. The Sicilian model says that even there, at 15 or 20 meters, you need the same rigor as if you were in the middle of the Mediterranean. The tragedy of Luigi Longo, which we mentioned earlier, happened at just 14 meters. That is the depth where people get complacent. The law forbids that complacency by demanding the same surface-supplied air and communication protocols, regardless of how easy the death seems.
The legacy of this turning point is that it paved the way for new national legislation. Italy is finally moving towards a unified system that takes the Sicilian principles and applies them from the Alps to Lampedusa. It's the end of the anarchy because the price of safety has finally been quantified as something that companies must pay, rather than workers paying with their lives. But as we've discussed, the law is only one pillar. The other is the culture of the divers themselves, knowing their rights, refusing to dive in unsafe conditions, and demanding the training they deserve.
That cultural shift is perhaps the hardest part to achieve. For decades, there was a macho culture in diving where taking risks was seen as part of the job description. The Sicilian law reframes that. It says that a diver who refuses to dive without a standby colleague isn't being difficult, they're being a professional. It empowers the worker. When you have a telematic register, your qualification is a documented legal asset. You aren't just an anonymous laborer, you're a certified specialist. That gives divers the leverage to say no to pirate companies.
It really feels like we're looking at two different eras of maritime history. The pre-2016 era of anarchy, where the Excel file of accidents just kept growing, and the post-2016 era, where safety is a technical and legal requirement. We've gone from a ministerial decree that only cared about what happened inside a port to a comprehensive system that protects workers in every body of water. It's a massive leap forward for workers' rights in Italy.
It is, but the work isn't done. As technology evolves with new gases, deeper platforms and robotic interventions, the training has to keep pace. The Sicilian model isn't a static document, it's a framework that allows for these international standards to be updated. As long as schools like CEDIFOP continue to push for excellence and the register is strictly maintained, we should see those black lines in the accident reports continue to dwindle. The goal is to make sure every diver who goes down comes back up every single time.
That is the ultimate takeaway. The Sicilian turning point proved that safety isn't a barrier to industrial development. It's the foundation of it. By ending the anarchy, Sicily didn't just save lives, it professionalized an entire industry and gave it a future. It's a reminder that, in the most dangerous professions, the most important tool isn't the helmet or the torch. It's the law that ensures you're never down there alone.
Exactly. Knowledge, training, and a clear legal framework are the true keepers of the abyss. Without them, the sea is just a place where routines break. With them, it's a workplace where experts can do incredible things safely.
If you found this exploration of diving safety and the Sicilian legislative revolution insightful, please share this episode with a friend or colleague who values workplace safety and industrial history.